before I launch into my talk, I thought of one more thing I should tell you about, and that is Pine Lake is only 4 square kilometers in size, so it's 1/24th size of Pigeon Lake. So any of the numbers here, if you're thinking about any of these options for Pigeon Lake, multiply times 24. It's also got a huge watershed by comparison to Pigeon Lake, so the watershed has a huge impact. And it's also stratified most of the summer, whereas Pigeon Lake is not. So that covers everything. So I worked with the community based restoration society at Pine Lake since 1991. I was their chief scientific advisor. And what I'm going to do today is give you an overview of the program there. Most of the work was done from 93 to 98. Talk about monitoring over the following 15 years. And before I forget, I think it would be fair to say that Pine Lake is the most actively managed lake in Alberta. More things have been done there than anywhere else. Tell you why I think the lake has responded as it has to these treatments, and give you some lessons from this program for other lakes like Pigeon Lake. The main issue at Pine Lake has been severe cyanobacterial or blue-green algae bloom. This is the classic picture of blue-green algae for Alberta, I think, in 1990. The goal of the restoration program was to restore Pine Lake to a natural level of productivity, and Jay stole my thunder in their model about returning to 1900. The lake was naturally mesotrophic, and so they wanted to return to that. And this was based on sediment core work at U of A. It had a big shift in productivity in the 70s, probably to do with the use of agricultural fertilizers. And it's important to realize that the lake will never be crystal clear, so you need to have realistic expectations, and this applies to all lake management. So just to very quickly run through the work that's been done. The Society did eight watershed BMP projects to address phosphorus loading from 4 areas which contributed roughly 70% of all the phosphorus to the lake. These are what were described as critical areas for restoration. This is one of the key lessons of the U.S. Rural Clean Water Program, that you can't fix everything, so you have to target certain sites and make that call where you're going to put your effort. The projects that failed were those that tried to fix everything or fix the wrong thing. So that's the watershed. I'm not going to tell you all that much about the watershed work because you're more focused on the in-lake. There was 3 sewage treatment projects, 2 lagoons that were either totally rebuilt, or there was 1 new lagoon that was installed as a result of legal action, and that was the only case of legal action at Pine Lake. That otherwise, this was all voluntary work with farmers and other groups. And then the biggie was the in-lake treatment project, which was hypolimnetic withdrawal done in 1998, plus a treatment wetland downstream. There was 2 wetlands already, and we added a 3rd one. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the thinking that went into doing these, selecting this in-lake treatment method. You mentioned Dave True's slide. That was originally my slide. And what we did was we started off with a detailed diagnostic study, trying to measure all the stuff that was going into the lake, all the phosphorus. We had automated did samplers on all the tributaries, all the major ones. We had precipitation sampling. We did very intensive lake work, and we installed a ring of well clusters. I think there were 6 of them around the lake to get a handle on groundwater inputs. We actually drilled, I guess, 18 separate monitoring wells in 6 clusters. And the end product of all this was the budget, Pine Lake budget, which showed that by far the majority, about 61%, was internal loading, was brown sice, and roughly a third was from the watershed. And in productive lakes of Alberta, that kind of ballpark is very common, somewhere around the 50 to 2/3 internal loading. So we assembled all this information, and the society had to make a choice of where to go, and that's kind of where you're moving, I guess. And the goal is to deal with phosphorus released from sediments through internal loading. I came up with a short list of 8 options for the group, and I also modeled the lake. I did bathtub modeling and produced a report. And we also looked at the various things that didn't make the short list. But there was 8 options. I'm just going to tell you about some of the more promising ones that we considered. We talked a lot about chemical treatments or dredging, and the bottom line was we just couldn't afford it. And that was for a lake that was 4 square kilometers. So these were actual quotes, I think, from 1994, something like that. I'm not sure the exact year of it, but hugely expensive. I mean, dredging is a wonderful way to deal with internal loading, but if you have unlimited funds. But all this program was fundraising by this restoration group. They tapped into various government grant programs, but we didn't have hundreds of millions of dollars to do this. So in the end, we just crossed that one off the list. We looked at aeration and oxygen injection. The rough estimate I had was about $150,000 a year, and that was rejected because the benefit only operates, is only achieved for as long as it's operating. We looked at enhanced flushing, and didn't even cost it out because we just didn't figure we could get the water supplies for it. So in the end, we decided on hypolimnetic withdrawal, which is basically taking cool, nutrient-rich water from the bottom of the lake and discharging it to the downstream creek. And the goal here is to gradually, over time, deplete the nutrients in the sediments. It was the most cost-effective of the options that were evaluated, roughly $350,000 in capital costs, and in-kind contribution of about $145,000. So it's roughly a $500,000 project. Virtually any inlet treatment method you select is going to be expensive. It's just the nature of the beast. It has a long history of use in Europe, so there's a lot of comparable projects to evaluate, consider. As I mentioned, it works gradually over time by depleting the pool, making the lake export more phosphorus over time. It's a big pipe. It's 22-inch diameter, high-density polyethylene, and the system has a weir, so Pine Lake is now operating like a reservoir. But the key thing is that Some of these hypolimnetic withdrawal systems use pumping, and this is a gravity-fed system. So basically, as soon as you open the valve, it's flowing. It doesn't require priming. It's not a siphon.
How so? Is it feed way downstream or to a lower elevation?
I think it's best to think of it as a hole in the side of the lake. It's this is a cross section of it. Basically, you're allowing the lake to drain through that pipe through the side of the lake. This is the sill.
As long as you're below the surface level of the lake.
That's right. What's driving it is just this head here. It took me about 6 months to believe it could work. So you're way ahead of me if you accept that now. But it seems too simple to work, but it does. And they've been operating for 15 years now. We looked at 2 different designs, went to through the various levels of approvals, and eventually the system was installed by 50 volunteers over a 3-week period in the fall of 1998. I think there was one engineer and one engineering tech that was working on the project. They were the only paid help. I kind of like this picture because that's a farmer, and he's got this huge chunk of pipe way over top of this cottager. They're working together. And the pipe is 5,000 feet long, and it was joined by heat fusion. So the volunteers learn how to join pipe this way. So that's hypolimnetic withdrawal. And the lake has remained stratified during system. I'm just telling you about how the pipe has performed. The lake has remained stratified during system operation and works as it was designed to work. These are I think Ron was showing some of these, or Chris. Basically, they just show thermal stratification in the lake. And one of the concerns with hypolimnetic withdrawal is that it can cause premature mixing of the lake, but that hasn't happened.
So it operates 7/24, 12 months of the year?
Only during the, there's a schedule depending on lake level, how long it can operate for, usually from around May 1st to around September 1st. It's
So-
not during the winter.
So the lake portion of the pipe itself is just lying on the lake bed with some kind of a grill or?
It goes to a big concrete structure in 10.2 meters of depth, and there's a grill on it, and there's concrete weights along the pipe that hold it down. The only installation problem we had was some of the straps, stainless steel straps, snapped, so the pipe was raising, and had to go back in and put on more weights. This type of plastic will float. So, we did monitoring of the downstream receding creek, and there was no adverse impacts. Basically, when you're doing hypolimnetic withdrawal, you're taking the worst water out of the lake and putting it somewhere. And there's really 3 issues with hypolimnetic withdrawal: whether or not you have stable stratification, which you do in this case, whether there's a sensitive downstream impact or a way of dealing with your wastewater, and whether you have enough water to operate the system. This takes roughly half the natural outflow of this lake and puts it through the pipe.
So you put your string together on land, as we saw from the picture with the tractor there, and then got everything organized, and then you have some kind of a barge to take out the pipe to the distance where you want it to, and then the system of gradually lowering it in.
Well, actually, they actually built a barge. These guys were real can-do.
Oh,
Good guys.
right.
And they hauled this 5,000-foot pipe out to the right location, and then they took a chainsaw at the end. It was capped, and then sunk it. And system is still in operation. I was talking to them on the weekend after 15 years. It's operated by the society still. I think they pay a weir operator a modest amount just to operate it. Okay, now I'm going to talk about what effects it's had. And this is a box and whisper plot, which I think Chris was using these. The center of it is the median, so it's roughly similar to the average. Half the measurements are over and half are under it. The top of the whisker is the maximum, that's the bottom, and these are just percentiles. So the pipe was installed here, and dissolved phosphorus has declined quite dramatically. And this is many years of monitoring, and I've only got data up to 2011 on here. We're still discussing one of the measurements for 2013, but it's kind of hard to see any other explanation but that the systems have this effect. It's declined quite well.
Or you can see it statistically. So do you have to get approval from the province then to lay this pipe into the lake, or was that a federal issue you had to deal with?
I think there was a navigable waterways approval of some sort. Most of the legislation is provincial. Is that your question?
Yeah, no, that's actually my question.
This is these bars are dissolved oxygen under the ice in winter up to about 2008. Where it's all blue, the lake is completely oxygenated. There's no anoxia measured. Where it's red, there's trouble. There's a history of winter kill in Pine Lake in winter, which I guess makes sense. So you can see, for example, back here, the lake was completely anoxic in the north end, and it definitely has gotten better. Right around 2008, there was a bunch of algae blooms. I'll talk about those. But overall, there's been an improvement in oxygen.
I just have one more question that's looking around in my mind here. So, pipe of that size moves a fair amount of water in a 24-hour period. So, how did you replace the water that you were taking out of the lake with this pipe?
Well,
maintain the water quality level?
It's taking roughly half of what would naturally outflow through the close Pine Creek.
Okay, so there was always water flowing through the creek, but it was the top level.
What happens is they store a bit more than would normally go out, so they store some of the spring runoff, and then they just discharge it over a longer period. So the lake level is more stable. It used to fluctuate a lot more.
Well, appreciate that. Okay.
The algal community seems to have changed. Microcystis was a dominant form historically. Actually, no, it was a dominant form in '92 when the worst blooms were occurring, and it was absent historically, and during 2007 when we were out there. And now it's dominated more by another form of algae, the phenylzymenic. It means a lot to Ron, but not to most of us. Microcystis is well, they're all nuisance forms. What more can I say? The community has changed. Chlorophyll declined quite dramatically after the pipeline was installed. The chlorophyll is a measure of the amount of algae in the water. It's a pigment that you measure. And in 2000 alone, it's right here, chlorophyll approached the target level that the society wanted to achieve. So I think we're looking pretty good up to about 2003. And then we got into some wet years after a drought. The drought was around 2000 or so. And the lakes started blooming again. And the really heavy rains were in these years. So there is this period in here when we were getting nuisance blooms again. Levels seem to have declined in 2013. Things have settled down a bit. Hard to say which way it's going to go from here, but these were definitely a concern.
Al, that's what I was getting to when I referred to 06 and Pigeon Lake. Several drier years with little runoff, and then all of a sudden rains come for a period of a year or two, and nutrient inflow, and the lakes was harmed.
That's right.
And that's exactly what you're getting here.
Yeah, it's a farming area, and
You gotta build up a manure on
That's right.
farmers' fields.
and there's a few other things going on here. I'm just going to run through some of these other.
I was wondering, you said that at 1998 you thought that the effect of the pipe was driving down phosphorus. Why don't you think the watershed projects had a lot to do with it? Because my understanding is that watershed projects, you can wait 10, 20 years before you actually see an impact on your phosphorus levels. So could it be there just was a slight delay and you could actually see the trend post?
There's probably some of that. There's a hit. I think what you're referring to is it seems the sites go weather slowly and it takes a long time to deplete totally. But I'll show you some actual data from those streams. So in 2007, we did a repeat of the 1992 diagnostic study, and this was to target all these agricultural sites where we had various projects. And we put in automated samplers on a lot of sites, flow gauging, and intensive lake sampling. This is kind of the key result for the watershed. I mentioned the 8 different BMP projects. At some of them, we got a really nice decline. This was at this is flow-weighted dissolved phosphorus. So it's a way of accounting for actual mass of phosphorus moving and total flow. So to adjust for the differences between dry years and wet years. And at some sites with these BMPs, like this one, where there was a project at the sheep farm, we got a nice decline. At this one here, there was a cow-calf wintering site that was moved, so that one was very promising. But there were some other sites where it got remarkably worse. One of which is here. This is a heavily farmed basin. We did 2 projects there, but it got worse. And this one here looks terrible, but it's a very small stream, so the total loading is small. This one here was one of our reference streams, like a control stream. And somebody built a subdivision right on top of the stream. And I suspect there's some sewage problems there. So we made some things a lot better and some things got worse over time. So the blooms at Pine Lake are likely a combination of internal and external nutrient loading. And weather and perhaps climate change are factors. And I'll show you some things that pertain to that. Some of these things are factors that we can control, like the in-lake treatment method. And some things are totally out of our control. One thing that I mentioned was that after the drought, which is here, this is a plot of rainfall at Red Deer, the nearest climate station. Very dry in these years. And this is when those recent blooms started. And over top of this, if you kind of squint a little bit, You see there's been a gradual increase in rainfall in the Red Deer area over time. This is roughly a, I don't know, 70, 80 year plot of rainfall. So that's a factor. And on top of that, there's the increase in population that's occurring anyway. The pipeline only withdraws in a good year about 153 kilograms per kilograms, and the watershed is contributing about 4 times as much. So whatever's going on in the watershed has a huge influence. And there was roughly a 9% increase in population, each of which is contributing more nutrients. The other thing that's going on out there is breakup has a huge impact, I think, on how productive the lake is. I think there was mention of 2006. What we found basically is that in years when the lake, when the ice left the lake early, it tended to get really green. So these years with the arrow are the early breakup years, and there's a very strong correlation between these two things. Just as a little bit of an aside, this is the longest ice off record in Alberta from the 60s. They had a lottery up there, and whoever guesses the breakup date wins the lottery. So we keep very accurate records of it. And basically what it's shown is that the worst years of algae blooms were when the lake was breaking up fairly early. And in recent years, it came later, like this year. And in fact, historically in the 70s, that's when people were talking about another ice age. So it's kind of a cool record. Now, I mentioned that we've got a nice decline in dissolved phosphorus, but it hasn't consistently gone below what I think it needs to go to totally control algae blooms. This red line is something from Danny Cook's book, the so-called cookbook of lake management. And I think the author was Sass, and he looked at a whole lot of lake projects around the world, and to get a consistent response, he figured you needed about 10 micrograms per liter, and this is the equivalent. This line is set at the equivalent of that 10. So we got quite a good control of the algae down in this area, but we're kind of wobbling around that line. So we've had some improvements in water quality, but not as much as some would like. And we have achieved the goal of reducing phosphorus levels, but we're still below that response threshold. Got better inter-DO, and chlorophyll has approached the goal of the restoration program, but we still get blooms in light years. The Society has talked a little bit about what they can do next. Wetland treatment is one thing that's been proposed. It's very effective at removing phosphorus. And I've talked to them a bit about considering microfloc injection as one option that might be feasible for a lake that size. Basically what you're doing is injecting an alum syrup or slurry right down into the bottom waters. And Newman Lake in Washington is an excellent test case of that. And they've achieved quite impressive results. The blue greens, which are the green bars in here, really declined in Newman Lake. But I think this year the Society's got other things on their mind. So now I'm just going to very quickly say what I think some of the key lessons for other groups are. One is that you need to use community enthusiasm while it lasts. It's easy to get people involved when they've got a crisis on their hands. But in recent years, what we found with the group at Pine Lake is they don't perceive it to be a crisis anymore. It's definitely better than it was, and finding it a little hard to get the group motivated. So you gotta kind of do your work early. The other thing is that you have to get phosphorus level very low to consistently control algae blooms. It's a case of go big or go home. And if you do some excellent program and you achieve maybe a 2 or 3% reduction in phosphorus, it's not going to control the blooms. You can perhaps model what kind of a benefit you get from more modest changes, but the sobering reality of Pine Lake is that it's got to be low to work. I think we've had an excellent start on our phosphorus budget. This is the budget we developed at Pine Lake. I'd just like to caution that it may take a while to get this totally correct. By the very nature of phosphorus budgets, you have to make assumptions, and little things make a huge difference, or can make a huge difference. There's one hypertrophic lake in Ohio, I think Harry has worked on, where there's 3 different budgets based largely on the same data, and they all tell a slightly different story. You'll probably need to control both internal and external loadings, and that's just the nature of the beast. There may be one simple solution, but I kind of doubt it. This is the case of Lake Biwa. I think it's the largest lake in Japan where they've done extensive work on the watershed, and still the lake is a bit of a mess. It's just taking forever for the internal loading to reduce. You have to assume there will be climate variability and design for it as best you can. This is the case of increasing rainfall over time. And there's always going to be weird events that occur, like there was a tornado that hit Pine Lake in 2000. And my last little bit of advice is to beware of magic fixes. If a method seems too good to be true, it probably isn't. However, if a method is any good at all, odds are somebody in NOMS has tried it. So that's why I got involved in NOMS 20 years ago, because a lot of guys with gray hair have tried it all. So, and if somebody comes flogging the latest miraculous cure, just ask them if there's any peer-reviewed case studies, and it's easy to check something like that out. The journal that I'm an editor of publishes, I think, most of the serious lake management literature, and so you can go online and at least read the abstracts from the website. So I'll leave a pile of these over by the desk there. These are just brochures on the journal. So that's all the wisdom I have for you. I think I was asked to allow a little time for questions.
I got another question. Have you had to do any maintenance on that pipe in the lake in terms of the pipe and the concrete blocks sinking into the sediment, which has clogged up your intake pipe a bit? Or?
Oddly enough, it hasn't sunk too deep. For the first 4 or 5 years, I dove on the intake just to inspect it, and it was fine. Pine Lake is one of the most studied lakes in Alberta for paleo work. There's some really good long cores taken from there. So I got from them the compressibility of the sediments and data on that. They designed for it,
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
I think it's,
Sorry.
go ahead, Brett.
When you talk about, for example, lowering SRP by 10 micrograms per liter,
True, 210.
210, and you talk about controlling algae blooms. When you say controlling algae blooms, I mean, when you talk to the pine group, does that still allow for, like, does controlling algae blooms mean that it's not going to have any cyanobacterial blooms? Or how do you define those goals with the pine group? Like, is it reasonable to?
Well, when SRP, the way I calculated it, was below that line, things were looking really good. It was below the criteria, the success criteria they had set. It was below the mesotrophic, eutrophic boundary.
So it shouldn't have any cyanobacteria blooms if you were to achieve that goal.
Well, it was less green.
Yeah.
As our esteemed colleague has pointed out, there's cyanobacteria in virtually all lakes.
Yeah. Okay.
It's nuisance blooms is the excessive blooms, and that's somewhat subjective, but we're talking about use impairments, that sort of thing. And there's only some people out there who've been there for the last 30 years and know what it was like historically. Anybody who's come there just in the last few years, they'll think, oh, it's a pretty green lake. But I remember '92 very well, and it was terrible.
I think it's important to point out that the hypolimnetic withdrawal system works quite well at Pine Lake because of its unique characteristics in terms of stratification. So that it isn't really an option at Pigeon Lake. Pigeon Lake doesn't clearly stratify, as you already pointed out. And also, other than like this year, because of the weir correction, or the correction to the weir height, on a typical year, we don't get outflow from Pigeon Lake, so you're going to end up breaking it.
Yeah, I don't think it's an option for Pigeon Lake. This is more an example of the process to go